You people, you know who I am. But you don't know why I'm here.
There and hand over the title. Well, I did what I had to do because that was right.
Here on Mid-South Wrestling.
Well, thank you. First of all, I'm just happy to be here. You know, today was,
I'm the crap about not having won the World Heavyweight title.
Hey, would you take a look in the National Enquirer this week? Has some wrestling news in there. Well, I went down to the store and I bought one, and as I looked through it,
now proclaimed $1 million champion, Ted DiBiase, a man who overtook.
Thursday night, November the 7th, shot at the title.
Oh, shot at the title. Let's face it, there isn't nobody in the whole wide world that doesn't figure I can't beat Holman.
Legends. Let's rethink this.
You're muted, dummy. I kept hitting it. It wouldn't come off.
Wow.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the newest episode of Legends. Let's rethink this. Tonight, we have a special guest with us in the house. He is all the talk in the wrestling world right now after making his return to Impact Wrestling this past Sunday night, Mr. Nick Aldis.
Gentlemen, how are we doing?
Doing great. Thank you so much for joining us here tonight.
Oh, no worries. I'm running on fumes a little bit, but I'll try to dig deep for you.
Well, I'm sure, you on fumes is better than us at full strength. So
yeah, we'll see.
First and foremost, I mean, all the rage in wrestling right now is the return of the former Impact World Heavyweight Champion to Impact Wrestling. Nick Aldis, you came back at Rebellion this past Sunday night. Did a great job on color commentary, we all thought.
No, thank you.
Then at the end of the show, you had a little face-off with Steve Macklin in the ring. Tell us what's going on in the world of Nick Aldis.
Well, we had been, chatting back and forth for a little while now, Impact and I, and then the opportunity presented itself, and it's we were all very much on the same page, and we were all excited about it. So then we shook hands, and we made an agreement, and I was set to start Rebellion. And then with obviously people know that Josh Alexander got hurt, and obviously Mickey got hurt, so there was a lot of sort of speculation and extenuating circumstances anyway, but it's sort of tied in quite well because it was sort of agreed upon that I would come back and immediately kind of state my intention to be in the mix for the world title. So it was a very fun way to sort of get stuck in. Tremendously grateful to Impact for showing me that sort of level of respect. And so now it's, now the responsibility is mine to, to prove them right.
Yeah. And the news broke, I think I read it today, that it looks like Macklin's first feud in Impact is actually going to be with PCO. So hopefully we're getting some Aldis and Macklin shortly thereafter.
Well, I think, look, that seed has been planted, and I'm actually getting sort of my first in-person experience of Steve Macklin, and so it's very cool to sort of get to be there for his big opportunity, his sort of level up moment, because I remember what it was like to sort of get the shot, right, getting the world title. And it's it's a very, very key point in your career. It's sort of it really it's time to get serious, and to realize that you've got an opportunity here to sort of establish yourself for a long time to come. But it's on you now to sort of deliver the goods at that sort of main event level.
Well, I can't wait to see what is in store for you with Impact. And FFP, we like to do some trips and go to some shows, and we definitely are going to have to try and catch Nick Aldis in the ring so we can boo and cheer and hold
well, look,
and talk shit.
I'll say this: I was really, really impressed with the level of production at Rebellion. I thought that venue was fantastic, and the production level Impact has just steadily improved, incrementally, and it's like you can really feel it hitting their stride now with packages and their entrances, and it's been really cool to sort of see that. And Eric Tompkins, who's I've known since I was in Impact the first go around, he's one of the guys who was there before in the previous administration. Getting to work with him again right out of the chute is really fun because we already know each other and we sort of understand each other and how I want to be presented and how they want to sort of tell their stories. And it's just really cool to sort of collaborate with this team because it's sort of really, really positive energy. Like the overwhelming feeling, in the dressing room Impact is that there's forward momentum and the guys are all sort of striving to, build something together. A healthy competitiveness, don't get me wrong, but that's sort of, hey, we're here to do business. We're here to sort of build this up together so that it's another great place to work. It's fun being part of that atmosphere again.
Yeah. So this was the first Impact event I've watched in a long time. And actually last week on our Filter Free podcast, we actually did an Impact episode from 2014 featuring a very young and stout Nick Aldis as Magnus. You were in the main event of the television program with Kurt Angle and Abyss. You guys were wrestling aces and eights. So it was a very aces and eights dominated television show.
Yeah.
Back in the Hulk Hogan, Brooke Hogan days.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it was we enjoyed it. Kind of had forgotten how much talent was actually on the roster with Impact back then. It was stacked.
Well, one of the things that I'm looking forward to in coming back and working with Impact is applying some of the lessons I've learned, from the last 5 years, but now being able to apply it to Impact and their history. Because, at this point, you're talking about a 20-year legacy with a who's who in the industry. There's a lot to build off of there. A lot of guys' origin stories, are either begin there or they weave their way through there. I know everyone knows, obviously, there's been some administrative changes and changes in ownership and stuff like that, but the Impact Wrestling property, you're now talking about their fingerprints are all over the entire industry, right? So it's fun to be able to sort of take my approach that I'd been that's worked for me somewhere else and now see how I can sort of connect that into the Impact sort of mainframe. Does that make sense? It's just a very sort of interesting challenge to sort of go, let's remind people just what it is we're working with here. Like, let's if you believe it, they believe it. Let's give it to them.
Yeah. And you took your initial run with Impact, and you really made a name for yourself. You were a dominant NWA World Heavyweight Champion. You headlined the first All In with Cody Rhodes, who just headlined WrestleMania. So, yeah, we all know that Nick Aldis is a name in the business. That's you're head above heels above a lot of people. And I think it's a big signing for Impact to get you. I'm excited to see where it goes. And because you are now back with Impact, I'm going to start paying more attention to Impact. Because it seems right. Now's the time. Like you said, there's a lot of young, really competitive guys there. and girls. So I mean, they had Deonna Purrazzo and Jordan Grace put on a hell of a match.
That knockouts division is
right.
very, very strong. Like that is world class. You know, so, the whole roster is world class. I mean, there's a ton of talent, and again, a really good mix of veterans and young guys, and a lot of the vets that are there. You know, especially when you talk about like the machine guns and people like that, like their fingerprints are all over the modern industry.
Yeah, they've been there for years. Yeah.
Well, but a lot of top guys in other promotions were borrowing from them. You know, but they're still operating at that high level. You know, it's like that's one of the things that I'm most excited about is just the roster. You know, because that's it. It's like it's when I'm looking around, I'm going, like, who can I work with, right? Like, who can I get in there and mix it up with? You know, with Impact, man, there's a lot, and I can't wait to get stuck in.
Yeah, well, we're here for it, so you'll have your supporters from FFP, and it's something that we're going to look forward to talking about on our other shows.
Yeah,
because I mean, you're a big name in wrestling, and a lot of people are super excited. You obviously. No, you coming back, we immediately went to Twitter to see the reaction that you got, and Twitter was blowing up with Nick Aldis has returned. So
you were trending.
Well, good. I'm glad to hear that. I mean, look, I obviously have I think like most wrestlers, I think we know we have a sort of necessary evil sort of relationship with social media, right? Like we take part in it, but we also try to, I mean, I certainly myself, I tend to try to limit the amount of time I spend reading other people's opinion of me because it's, at some point you've just got to feel it. And, when you're heading in the right direction, when you've got positive momentum, when, you're on the front foot and you just got to trust your gut. But having said that, it certainly seemed that there was a very, overwhelmingly positive response online. So I appreciate that. And again, it's now, the responsibility is now on me to do whatever I can to justify that, right? Not just to the audience, but also to Impact for giving me the opportunity.
Yeah. And not only that, but you're going to get a much bigger spotlight now. Once again, the spotlight that you probably deserve. So, but there's two other lingering questions. Number one, how's Mickey? We hope that she's well and can't wait to see her back in the ring.
She is doing well. I wouldn't want to put a number on it percentage wise, but she's certainly not in any pain or discomfort anymore with her rib. It was in a very awkward spot, which made it sort of difficult to heal and, made it difficult for her to avoid aggravating it. So it took a bit longer than we anticipated for it to heal, but now it looks good and it looks like she'll be clear, within weeks.
Awesome news. Awesome. I know a lot of people were worried about that. So that's good to hear. And number two, I looked on your Twitter the other day, and I think it was last weekend. Did you run it back with Tim Storm again last weekend?
I did run it back with Tim.
How was it?
Yeah, it was special. And I think because it was in Texas as well, and there was part of me that had always wanted to do that one more match with Tim in Texas. I'd always had this sort of bug in the back of my brain about doing it at the school where he teaches, and having the, basically the audience be his kids and trying to figure out a way to sort of tell that story and tie all that in with, with video packages and all that stuff that, that we did so well at that point. And just never happened. So it was cool to at least get more of a sort of, hey, let's run it back. And on a personal level, I adore Tim Storm. He's just a first class human being. And it's, just as a guy, I was just excited that I was going to get a chance to hang out with him and shoot the breeze with him and, chill afterwards and all that sort of thing. So yeah, but very, very happy to have been able to mix it up with Tim again.
Good. Yeah, I saw that tweet and I was like, damn, man, I really would like to see this. So that's awesome. I'm glad it was a good time.
Yeah.
You went over though, right?
I still razzed him mercilessly about his age because that's our thing.
So who went over?
I was gonna say you went over, right?
I don't want to talk about it. I got screwed, is what happened. He turned on me, hit me with a cricket bat.
Oh no!
Cricket bat.
hit me with a damn cricket bat
in Texas.
Yeah.
Where did he get one?
It's a long story.
They said, "My God, where did he get that fat baseball bat from?"
Yeah, I'm sure they had no clue what it was.
Well, I call shenanigans, so we need to run it back again.
British beating stick.
All right, funny. Well, everybody, we are here with Nick Aldis tonight to discuss something that we brought up on our podcast. Hulk Hogan's dominant run in the WWF in the 80s. So we kind of think Vince might have painted himself into a corner, building Hulk Hogan up as such a dominant face for the company. And so we kind of wanted to discuss that tonight on this show and bring in somebody who was a great heel champion of his own to talk about some of the heels that the WWF had in the 80s and early 90s and how this could have been woven into a better story and not just been Hulkamania for years and years and years and years.
9 years.
And more. So.
All right. Interesting.
So to get started, we all know Hulk Hogan beat the Iron Sheik at Madison Square Garden to win the WWF Championship in January of '84. Now, we're going to start off a little bit before that. Bob Backlund is who the Iron Sheik beat for that championship. And Bob Backlund won that belt in February of 1978. So he lost to the Iron Sheik in December of '83. So going forth, for 5 years and 10 months, Bob Backlund was the WWF and WWF champion. The Iron Sheik went over. It was obviously he was a transition champion, is what they kind of call it. And his official reign was 28 days before losing that belt to Hulk Hogan. Now, I was probably one of the biggest Hulkamaniacs in the world at the time and had no issue seeing Hulk Hogan go over every time he got into the ring back as a kid. But it's obvious that the WWF was booked towards children. Because if we run this back the opposite way and start talking about the NWA, your vast majority of champions were all heels, especially with Ric Flair.
Mm-hmm.
So TJ, let's start out in 1985. So Hulk Hogan has now been the champion for a good 14 months here. Let's start out at WrestleMania 1, 1985.
First of all, 85, great year. I was born the day after WrestleMania 1. But before we start with WrestleMania 1, I think it's important to start with the war to settle the score. So this was actually one of the few Piper Hogan singles title matches in the time frame, at least that was televised. And this was on February 18th, 1985. It was actually, so this show was 1 month before WrestleMania. It was in Madison Square Garden. They still sold 22,000 tickets, which is extraordinary if you think about it. That doesn't happen very often. The only televised match was Hogan and Piper, and Hogan won by DQ. So once you go from this was, of course, was on MTV. Then you go to WrestleMania 1, and that sets up Piper and Orndorff with Bob Orton against Mr. T and Hulk Hogan. And we all know how this worked out. All the pageantry with Muhammad Ali and Billy Martin was out there and Liberace, and it was a tremendous spectacle. But I feel like we never got any closure here with Hogan and Piper. This was pretty much it. They didn't feud too much longer after this. Mr. T moved on to Piper, and Hogan, as we'll get into, moved on to actually a couple different people before the following WrestleMania.
Nick, what are your thoughts on Rowdy Roddy Piper?
Well, I love Piper. I think he's got to be up. I think he's really got to be in anybody's top 10 promos of all time. I won't debate on, who's 1, 2, 3, etc. But he's got to be he's got to be top 10 talkers of all time. I mean, just when you talk about someone who committed to their persona, who just completely believed 100% in what they were doing, and you never saw even a flicker of self-doubt or second-guessing, hesitation. You never saw any of that with Piper. He was so committed and believed so deeply in who he was, and it just that's what made him so memorable. But when you're talking about Hogan and Piper, that rivalry, it's sort of a double-edged sword, because the thing that made that rivalry so good, so electric, right, so palpable, just so head and shoulders above any other feud that was going on at that time, is also the same reason why it had to be short and probably wasn't going to go on and on and on, because one, it was legit, right? There was a legit sort of rivalry and beef and heat between those guys.
Mm-hmm.
And because Piper wasn't about to, didn't want to put Hogan over, and from what it seems like, Vince and everybody else really didn't want to, Hogan to put Piper over. So it's sort of like you're going to reach an impasse, because they've both decided that, doing the honors isn't going to be good for their business. So it's kind of like they had to move on, because neither one of them was going to budge.
It was all countouts and disqualifications.
Yeah. And, that was way more common than people realize. Right. And it wasn't this thing today. Well, one, because the fans weren't talking about it, but also because, there wasn't this sort of, people just respected that about the guys, because it was also what made them draws and what made them feel special, because they sort of policed themselves in terms of like, hey, like, I know who I am, like, and I'm, Harley Race and Flair, or, Dusty. I mean, these, all of these guys were the same. They were they were all looking out for their own brand. Right. But they're all working in the marketplace together. And sometimes that means that a deal can be done, and sometimes it can't, just like in any other business. It's only in like the more recent past that suddenly become this like controversial thing, like, oh, they can't agree, and because back in the day, there was no like one man whose word was final. Yeah. Like,
yeah. There was lots of politicking.
Well, there was in a promotion. Bill Watts, Bill Watts got what Bill Watts wanted. But what I'm saying is that if you still didn't want to, if you still couldn't comply, then you could just move on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You could go somewhere else. It wasn't like the end of your career.
Well, that's probably why they all book themselves as the top draw. Bill Watts and Vern Gagne. And
yeah, when you sort of go back and talk about this stuff, you have to take that into consideration, because it's a massive part of the context. Like the culture that existed then was so different than the culture that exists today. Especially even with like contracts, even, like, I think people would be surprised at how loosely, how loose a lot of these agreements were, even with so much on the line and so much at stake, particularly for Vince when he's gambling so much on WrestleMania and, sort of all that. I mean, they were not as buttoned up legally, as they are today. So it's fascinating. I don't know if I've ever really fully understood. I don't know if anyone does, why New York ended up being so, heavily a babyface territory. I've never. All I can surmise is that Bruno was just so successful and so popular and became such a cultural fixture of New York, right? Like that, it just sort of permeated the New Yorkers' spirit, and so that became that's what wrestling was to those people. Wrestling was, hey, we go and our hero wins at the end of the day. You know, like that's what we like. We're winners. You know, I can only assume that it's because, you know, maybe it's part of that New York mentality, you know, because if anyone who's been to New York knows that, you know, New Yorkers are proud about being New Yorkers. Like they do have this sort of spirit of like, you know, we can roll up our sleeves, we can do it. Like we're a success. So I wonder if that played into it. But that's the thing. That's one of the things I love about this business is I like trying to reverse engineer this stuff and psychoanalyze it, because at the end of the day, that's what this business is. It's psychology. You know, you're playing with people's emotions to try to achieve a certain business result. So it's fascinating to me to reverse engineer this stuff and go, why did that work?
You know? I think you said it best when you said it happened more often than people would realize, because back in that day, the result was not necessarily what the people were there to see. They were there to see the match.
Right.
They didn't care who, I mean, they wanted to cheer somebody, but if it ended up, you know, the promoter would find a way to send them home happy.
Yeah.
But it wasn't always necessarily a 1-2-3 pinfall.
Right. People weren't hanging their expectations on the outcome of all the matches and sitting there going, oh, I can't believe they're burying so and so, you know, because they lost one match, you know. But let's not get into that. But Jesus H Christ, everyone, just take a fucking step back and chill out.
Enjoy the show.
Jesus, he's fine. Trust me. Fucking
yeah, I think the fans probably care way more than
millions of dollars in a bus.
Yeah, the fans care way more than the wrestlers do these days.
Selling merch left and right, and being presented as like the biggest deal in the business. He's fine, guys.
Cody.
Jesus. Anyway.
So from there we move on.
Now that we've got that out of the way. I think the other thing that's important for context when you go back and talk about this stuff is like the long title reigns. Again, it wasn't necessarily something people were talking about, right? Like wrestling fans who were all getting together and going like, oh, we're going to go to the Garden this week and see Bruno. They weren't going like, hey, did you know that it's been 450? Like, they weren't doing that. I don't think they were. I mean, I wasn't there.
All the rage now is that Roman Reigns has to hold it for like, what is it, another 5 years to match Bruno's reign? Could you imagine everybody would go absolute batshit crazy?
You realize that people like that back then, they saw, you know, they saw Bruno defend the title. I don't know, probably about the same, like, I don't know, a few times a year. You know, they built to it, and in the meantime, you didn't really see him wrestle at all on TV, right? So and people just, they didn't think of wrestling that same way. They weren't sitting there going like, oh, he's feuding with so and so. It was just more like, oh, here are the matches at the Garden this week, or, you know, like, here's what happened, and, you know, oh, who's he wrestling? Ooh, I don't like the look of him. I'm going to go cheer for Bruno, right? Like, it was a bit more casual. Well, a lot more casual, I think. So the title wasn't this. It wasn't necessarily this this thing that it is today, right? In terms of like the significance to the show, there wasn't this constant fascination of like who's going to be champion next, and it was like you said, Timmy, they came to see a contest between two guys they cared about, and then with Bruno, it was like, because he was the number one, he's the champion too. You know, like, he's the best.
I think back then they were just they wanted to see Bruno wrestle whatever new heel it was they came up with. It wasn't about who was winning. It was about, we want to see Bruno because we assume he's going to win. We want to see how he fares against Villain A or whatever.
That's the thing. I think I remember chatting about
Nick, we got to pause real quick. We have a huge audio issue on your end.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you're breaking up really bad.
Let me see.
We can edit this out.
There. How's that?
Perfect.
Better.
You're back.
I don't know what happened there. It switched to the other mic. I'm sorry.
The mosquito came out.
This is a stupid thing. Where was I? I can't remember what I was about to say.
We were talking about Bruno and why fans came to see him.
Yeah. I was talking about this on Sam Roberts' show when I did his show. And I remember we were discussing sort of the difference in mentality of the fan when it comes to a heel territory or a babyface territory. And it's like, to be honest, I don't know how much of it was, engineered and how much of it was more just doing what good promoters did back then, which was just sort of listening to the people, feeling where they were at, and then just kind of adapting and steering the ship towards, what they were obviously reacting to. Because it's like, if you were, Jim Crockett and Ric Flair comes along and just totally Rick in that period was so untouchable, right? Particularly on television.
Correct.
It's like, you're going to figure out a way to anchor the whole deal around him, right? Like, you're just going to find a way because you're just going like, holy shit, this guy is special. But, with Bruno, if you're Vince McMahon Senior, you're doing the same thing because you're going like, I can't believe it. This guy runs out to the ring and 20,000 people go bonkers. They love this guy. Like, they loved him. Like, I know it's like a thing that people say, but like, that happens so rarely in this business where fans like love someone, right? Like, they loved Bruno. And I think, again, they just sort of go, okay, well, I guess we'll build around that, right? Like, we'll build around that. People were paid to see Bruno beat someone. Great. Let's bring in someone to beat. With Flair, it was like, people will pay to see if someone can beat this guy.
Right.
Right. How do we maximize that? And therein basically is to me is like the worst kept secret about good booking is just like, yeah, try to allow something to present itself to you first and go, okay, that's what the people are feeling. How do I sprinkle some fairy dust on that and make it bigger and better? And you go from there.
Yeah.
And
promos,
I think one thing that they used to do and that WWE's kind of hit gold on now with Roman Reigns is not having your title up every single show, every single week.
Right.
I haven't had an issue with the Roman Reigns title matches only on pay-per-views, missing a couple pay-per-views here and there. It wasn't a thing. Growing up in the 80s, you didn't see Hulk Hogan wrestle on every single show every week. And it kind of got to where we were seeing that way too often throughout the late 90s, through the 2000s, up through the 2010s. And it was the same thing with you and you're running the NWA. You might have been at the vast majority of their shows, NWA Power, but you sure weren't wrestling on all of them.
Right.
And so you're not oversaturating the fans with those same matches or whatever every single week. Because
and I think that we just or certainly then my input was always the uniqueness of the show and just the overall sort of gathering interest will be enough to keep the momentum going for a while. Like, we don't have to rush anything because as more people start to go, man, this is a fun show, then more people start joining it, and they're just excited about the format and style of the show as well. So you can kind of not get away with is the wrong word, but you can afford to let things breathe a bit more, right? Because you go, hey, look, let's not. That's just me with my business hat on, yeah. But it's like, but hey, if they're already coming for this, and that's, we don't need to give them this, and this yet. It's like Brian Dixon, one of the most successful British promoters of all time, probably the most successful British promoter of all time, who I wrestled for full time, when I first started in wrestling, he would always say to me, like, always leave him wanting more. It was it was kind of send him home happy, but always leave him wanting more. Don't let the show go too long. Don't go nuts. Like, just get enough to get him there, and then save some. We're coming back. We're coming back in 3 months. We're coming back in 6 weeks. Like in some of those places, he was running them like once a month, and he's let's leave them wanting more. They're coming back.
You always got to give him an angle to come back for.
Yeah, and but it's also just understanding that they're going to be satisfied with this, and this. Like, then now you've got a selling point for the next time. You've got the things you didn't use yet. And that's no different to a musician with songs or a comedian with jokes, right? It's like, I'm going to save some material. I've got some more material I'm working on for the next tour. I will give you some greatest hits and some of our new stuff, but maybe the newest stuff, maybe that's the next tour. It's just show business. It's like, and I think that was the thing that I, really, really started to study over the last sort of 5 years, and really tried to wrap my head around, and pick the brains of so many guys from that era who really understood that mentality, like Ricky Morton, Austin Idol, Harley when he was alive, like just, Dory, just getting to hear their philosophies and just telling me about the sort of prevailing mentality of the promoters back then and the bookers back then. Like, that's what I like to pay attention to, is like, how did the bookers know that this was the right way to do it? How did they decide that this was the best idea? Again, just reverse engineering it. Yeah, exactly.
That's how they knew.
Well, no, you say that, but that's my point, is because that's what they're thinking of.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only, or the strongest motivating factor, which is probably the biggest contrast between then and now, because the creative isn't always directly, or at least in a completely straight line, connected to revenue.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much the sort of long and short of it. When your revenue hinges 100% on the quality of your booking, you will book a better show.
Correct.
So,
well, let's get back into Hogan here. I think once we roll into 1986, Vince realizes that Hulkamania is a force to be reckoned with, but I think he also realizes he might have a problem, because he has a babyface champion that is bigger than most heels he has. So he has to start creating this monster factory. We start at WrestleMania 2, Hulk Hogan defeating King Kong Bundy in a steel cage match. He is indeed the first of the monsters that Hogan has to come up against, even though I think Hogan was about 6 inches taller than Bundy.
Oh, easily.
Yeah, Bundy was a large man. And I think this kind of kicks off Vince's fascination with the heel monster attacking Hogan.
Yeah.
Yeah, we go from what? Bundy, and you have Andre, you have Big John Studd. The next thing you know, you have One Man Gang, Big Boss Man, Akeem, whatever the case may be.
This is where it gets interesting with Bundy, because it's almost like Vince's. I mean, Hogan Andre's got to be in his mind to some degree by now. Especially after seeing this match.
Well, and they'd work together. With the roles reversed.
Yes,
right. They did.
So he'd already probably made a mental note that they had good chemistry and that Andre liked Hulk, and that he had taken good care of him, and was like, he sort of put when Hogan started getting really hot, he probably did start thinking, oh, this is perfect. Andre likes him. I can talk Andre into, when the time is right, doing the big favors and, really passing the torch and like setting the tone. Maybe, I mean, I look, there's the people have made a living trying to analyze Vince McMahon's, decisions, right? Like, because obviously, he made the best decisions. He's won the wrestling war forever, mm-hmm. right? So it's like, I'm certainly not the first person, to try to analyze Vince's thought process when it came to business, especially at that time. But I can't imagine that that he didn't have all that, mm-hmm. Swimming in his head, when and maybe that is why it was a steady stream of giants for Hulk. I think also you have to remember that the reason that Hulk got so over at that time was he fit perfectly with pop culture at that time. Muscle was back, right? Action heroes. We had Arnold in the movies. We had Stallone. You had like Bruce Willis and all that. So, you had, muscle was sort of back in vogue. Well, right? We'd gone from the sort of Dustin Hoffmans and sort of smaller, kind of leading men, and now we were back to like macho Rocky. Leading men. Yeah. And I think that Hulk represented sort of wrestling's equivalent of that, like the ultimate superhero, like the sort of larger than life, I'm super strong. I can kick everyone's ass. And, I'm the good guy. It all sort of fits. So naturally you go, all right, if he were a superhero, what would he be doing? Probably beating some kind of giant monster.
Yeah.
Boom. There you go.
Well, and I don't want to underestimate the impact of, which we talked about, Vince's mindset. Being on MTV was huge at that point. Cyndi Lauper did more for the WWF than half the wrestlers had done for the WWF at that point, just providing that credibility.
Yeah, but and I agree with you. But the part of that that's also important is the fact that Hulk had enough credibility already that it didn't feel forced.
Yes.
Because you can pay a celebrity to say that your top wrestler is cool if you like.
See Cyndi Lauper endorsing Bob Backlund.
Right. Exactly. It's like, there's a different, the people subconsciously know when they're being fed a sort of an organized campaign versus something they can feel, oh, wow, even Cyndi Lauper likes Hulk Hogan. Like, I knew I was right. I knew I was right to be a fan of Hulk Hogan because there were probably a lot of people who were like closet fans, right? And again, this is where self-awareness is so important in wrestling, because if you were too proud and not self-aware enough to go, there are probably a lot of people who are fans, but they won't admit it. And we kind of need them to admit it if we're going to get more popular. And then you get, okay, well, it was the 80s version of influencer marketing.
Yeah.
Right.
I remember that very well.
Oh yeah, Hulkster's the best, Lou Albano and and I hate that Roddy Piper, and suddenly everyone's like, oh my God, she watches it. Like she knows all the characters. Oh, I don't feel weird about watching it anymore. Yay, wrestling's cool.
Yeah, I remember growing up in second grade, I was so embarrassed to be a wrestling fan. And so you're talking, we're like WrestleMania 4, WrestleMania 5 time frame. Because, it's fake. How do you watch that fake stuff? And then as a kid, you're like, oh, well, nobody. Why do I like this? But I always liked it, and it didn't become like mainstream.
Yeah, until it happened to me at the end of the Attitude Era, because, at the end of the cartoony era into the Attitude Era. Like my friends made fun of me at school for being a wrestling fan because in their mind they associated it with being like childish. Like, kids.
My friends still make fun of me, but now it's
like, because, but when you think about it, like it was, the product was very much geared towards kids in the late 80s, early 90s. So then by the time you're in high school and you're like 12, 13, 14, it's like suddenly it's not so cool to, but then suddenly half of these guys who once were like bubblegum, red, white, and blue guys are now suddenly these like kick-ass rebels. Just at the time that you're transitioning into being a rebellious teenager, suddenly I never forget, like I turn around, like it felt like one week everyone was making fun of me for being a wrestling fan. The next week they were all like climbing up on those stairwells, like doing the crotch chop, and yeah. So I mean, I get that. It's like you need something. It's like once it catches fire in terms of pop culture, it's like you've got to just do everything you can to just keep fanning those flames.
See, I just didn't have any friends.
You still don't. It's fine.
Yeah, I was going to say, why are you speaking in the past tense?
I walked into that one.
Poor TJ. He said nothing for like 10 minutes, and then first thing he does is lob up a big softball.
And we shit all over him. Welcome to the show, Nick. Here we go.
Yeah. But shitting all over TJ is one of his unfulfilled sexual fantasies.
Oh,
Cleveland Steamer.
Too much.
That and sandwiches. He likes sandwiches.
I do like sandwiches. I think what's interesting though is in between. So we should mention Big John Studd's in here too, because the Heenan family. Mm-hmm. But in between Bundy and Andre at 3, Vince sandwiches in Orndorff for the big event in Toronto in August of '86.
Man, it was a great match.
And that's what I'm wondering. So he clearly has this monster factory in his mind, but yet he puts Hogan with a good worker. Now, granted, this card also had Steamboat and Jake in their ridiculous feud they had in '86. Mm-hmm. They draw 61,000 people. Like you said, the match was great. But again, as we also mentioned earlier, this match ended by disqualification for the world title. And I mean, we wouldn't see Hogan and, a good worker this brought back up until 5.
Perfect. Well, Macho, yeah.
Macho, yeah. I think it's, well, again, I think you have to ask the question, was it deliberately a monster factory, or was it more the mentality that I was just sort of pontificating might have been Vince's train of thought, which was more like, okay, he's my superhero. I have to now present supervillains.
Yes. And
Paul Orndorff totally looks like a supervillain. He doesn't have to be bigger than Hogan, but he was so jacked and so incredible. He had that, iron jaw. I mean, his face looked like it was carved out of granite, right? Like he looked like a heel. Like he looked like a bad guy in a comic book or a action film, right? He would have been the bad guy because he would have been that one who was like a bit of a stick in the mud and a bit of a stiff, but then he suddenly took off his shirt and you went, oh shit, he's jacked. Like he could kick my ass. Wait a minute. Go get him, Hulk. Like that's the mentality. Is it's, I always say this to guys, like young guys who are, especially if they're, trying to work on being a heel. And I'll just go like, look, before you start worrying about like the next steps, right? Like your branding and your signature moves and your signature names and your this and that, like just wrap your head around the basic concept is you want to do something to make people dislike you, right? So it's either being aggressive or obnoxious or arrogant or whatever, right? Some sort of quality that people don't like. Then present yourself as someone who the audience, a male in the audience might go, God, look at this guy. I'd like to kick his ass. But then you do just enough to make that guy think, I don't think I could kick his ass, actually. But I hope the babyface kicks his ass.
Here, yeah.
Yeah. But that babyface is going to whoop his ass. And that'll show him. Right? Like, that's the line you want to be finding. Flair was so great at that, right? Because he'd feed and bump and feed and bump and feed and sell. And then he'd, but right when the people are sort of going like, oh, anyone can kick Flair's ass, he turns it around, boom, bing, 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 hits a few things. There's a nice suplex, hits a nice knee drop. Now he goes and looks over in the front row and goes like, shut up, fat boy. That one was for you, right? And everyone's like, okay, get him, Steamboat,
But see,
I know, sort of gone off on a tangent.
This is where, as an adult, that I would like to have seen it go a different way than it did. So we have the main event, which is the most watched wrestling match of all. What was it? 33 million people tuned in to watch Hogan Andre.
NBC.
That's absolute insanity, and that right there is why if you have a Mount Rushmore of wrestling, Hulk Hogan has to be on that Mount Rushmore.
Yeah, and Andre the Giant.
Right.
Yeah.
33 million people. Now, I want to say Austin's heyday was an episode of Monday Night Raw against The Undertaker, and I think they did 10 million.
Yeah.
That's not even a third.
Yeah.
So, but you have the main event, Andre the Giant defeats Hulk Hogan with the infamous referee swap, which was brilliant. I
Damn you, Dave Hebner.
Brilliant. And immediately sells the WWF Championship to Ted DiBiase. Now, this is where I think they got it wrong. They should have let that go and be. And let DiBiase get that little run in as champion.
Yeah. I think I could tend to agree with you on that. I think they could have afforded to have a little bit of a chase for Hulk.
Or Macho.
Or
they could have turned this into Hulk and Andre are going back at each other. And now Savage is chasing DiBiase for the belt.
Yeah.
Because you could have easily had Hogan Andre at WrestleMania 4, just as it was in their tournament. Got rid of that silly tournament and had a normal WrestleMania. And you could have had Savage and DiBiase. And but even then, I don't think it would have hurt had Savage not gone over there. Because you could have always left, the fans could have gone home happy with Hogan defeating Andre again.
Yeah, I can't think of anything to sort of immediately disagree with you. I mean, I just think that I don't know all the circumstances, that went into that, but it's certainly interesting to me to think what could have been if they had taken the formula they had with Hulk and then started to apply a little bit of a more, let's say, Dusty Rhodes type formula, just in dribs and drabs, okay, let's let him have let's at least do 6 weeks of a chase, something to sort of let the people, before WrestleMania, right, before the big one, right, like for the first time, it's like he's got to chase the title. He's got to, can he work his way back to being the best? Hey, he was in Rocky 3, which was what launched him, to the next level in a lot of ways. And what happens in Rocky 3? Rocky gets beat in the beginning so that he has to then push and work harder to get back, because he knew that how many times were people going to come out to the movies to see him just train for a fight and win?
Yeah. I kind of would have liked to have seen how it would have worked. Like if you could go back and redo time.
Yeah.
Andre sells the belt to DiBiase and they give DiBiase a 6-month run up to the first ever SummerSlam. And then that could have, Macho could have gone over or whatever the case may be at SummerSlam. But you give DiBiase that run and let him use his money and use different tactics to keep that belt. I mean, how great would it be to have an episode of Saturday night's main event and DiBiase's in this match against some big star. He's up against the ropes and it's going to happen. And the next thing you know, Virgil comes out with money and pays the guy to lay down or whatever.
Yeah.
There's so many ways you could have gone with a character like Ted DiBiase.
Certainly with that gimmick, like with the way that they're, because again, I always are going to keep going back to this, but to understand the booking of that time period, I really think you have to think along the lines of a superhero, like a superhero story. It was like a episodic superhero TV show for kids. If that's at least how you're booking the main event angle, the Hulk Hogan is pulling the wagon, and we book Hulk Hogan like he's the superhero in the movie or in the TV show. So he can face adversity, but ultimately he's a superhero. He's special. He's got special powers. Like, he's not the same as everyone else.
Right.
I think if you're always thinking like that, you kind of get a better idea of how certain things shake out the way they did. And I just watched the Dusty biography, which I thought was fantastic. But they mention in that about when Dusty was in Florida, like he would have to go away sometimes because nobody else could get over if Dusty was there. And maybe that was a concern here with Savage, with Hulk. It was
that was kind of what Hulk did. He went away to make the movie.
Well, then that's when he made No Holds Barred, right?
Barred, yeah.
So that's the perfect time to bring Savage in.
Yeah.
But I'm going to play devil's advocate here because I think it's hilarious that you guys are second guessing probably the best long-term angle in wrestling history between Hulk Hogan and the Macho Man.
Oh, I'm not second guessing it. It's more just a sort of, what would have happened had it, because you can still get there.
Yeah.
Like I don't think anyone. I don't think anyone is suggesting that that's not where you get to. It's more about could we have had something with a bit more substance at WrestleMania 4?
Yeah,
for Savage to win the title.
Yeah, the tournament.
And then controversial question here. Not necessarily saying I advocate for this decision or not, but did you really need Hulk Hogan at WrestleMania 4 at all?
No,
because
it was a throwaway match.
We could have It could see nowadays, if Hulk had gone away for a while and stuff, they wouldn't have just thrown him on WrestleMania. He would have been on Raw the night after. Yeah. He would have been the big return and everyone, and that, because again, it's like the next night after WrestleMania, the first thing you got to do is go, all right, guys, now here's what's on the menu.
But I will say that at that point, as hot as Hogan was, I don't think there was a chance Vince was going to run a WrestleMania without Hogan on it.
No.
Well, that's the thing. That's what we're saying. It does seem on the surface, when you just say it out loud, we should keep Hulk Hogan off WrestleMania. It's like, okay,
yeah. See how that works. The first primary pay per view.
Right. Yeah.
Legit.
Write that down and then burn it. But if you'd had it's more of that thing of like, look, Vince has had moments in his career, lots of them, where people have been like, you're not serious. And he's like, I'm dead serious. And then rolled the dice. And this could have been one of those. Maybe, hypothetically.
SummerSlam 93.
That's, respectfully, I don't know if that's necessarily the same.
Well, no, I'm not putting it up against this. I'm just saying that was one, did you really need to do a countdown on this one?
Yeah. I'm saying more from the sort of gamble and leave Hogan away.
Oh, yes.
And let Savage win and let Savage sink or swim by himself without any sort of association with Hulk. And then if it works, great. Now you built it, and now you really know what you have. But by sort of constantly intertwining them, maybe they didn't quite get as much juice out of that as they could have. Who's to say? We'll never know.
Wasn't Flair supposed to come into the WWF around?
That was
SummerSlam 88.
SummerSlam 88. Yes.
Yep.
I mean, I don't know how close it got, but yeah, there was that rumbling that it was close.
My God, that would have changed
the
landscape of wrestling. Good God.
Oh,
no telling what would have happened then.
How would that have shaped WrestleMania 5? Because I feel like Savage would have been ass out on that.
Can you think of it this? Can you imagine if they'd have actually been able to pull it off, but then they had booked it like Dusty would have booked it? You know what I mean? Like if they'd have put a bit of that Southern stank on it. With
there was no chance.
You know what I'm saying. You can laugh, but you know exactly. Yes. You know what I'm saying when I say that.
Absolutely.
Because I to this day maintain that one of the things that was able to happen during the Attitude Era to help bring it back to that same level of red hot popularity was Vince finally allowed the WWF to have a little bit more of that Southern stank, right? It had a bit more attitude. The angles were more personal and more,
realistic, more violent, more.
Right.
Where is that from? That is all lifted from Mid-South, Memphis, Dallas. You know what I mean? Like Florida. Like this is.
I was laying in bed.
Southern stank, boy. Had that, had that NWA 80s. And you think about it, Austin, Taker, Sean, like all the top guys who helped usher in that era, and Brett with Calgary, they all loved the territories, and that's what their influence was.
Yeah, I literally just this past night, I've been going through some sleep issues lately. I was laying in bed about 2:30 this morning. I'd been laying there for about 2 hours and finally gave up. Turned on the old Peacock and started up Monday Night Raw from 1997. It was the episode right after the pay-per-view where Undertaker and Mankind wrestled. Taker was the champion after WrestleMania, and Brett and Austin are in their feud. Brett and Austin fought the night before at the In Your House pay-per-view, and then they had a street fight on this Monday Night Raw. And Stone, it was when Brett was hurt. He hurt his knee or something, so they had to write him off TV or whatever. And Austin went to town on him with a chair. And as your babyface, and obviously Austin was a different babyface than everybody else was, but I mean, I had forgotten just how great that rivalry was. Because, I mean, I don't know if had Brett stayed in the WWF, you wouldn't have needed Mr. McMahon, because the Brett Austin rivalry was that good.
That's an interesting take.
That is.
Yeah.
I don't know, man. You just think about 97. Had you been able to keep the USA versus Canada thing going,
it was hot
because it was white hot.
Yeah.
You wouldn't have needed Mr. McMahon.
But I think it's a different kind of heat.
Would it have been enough? Well, here's the thing. Ordinarily, I would have said, you're certainly not wrong in the sense that there was a hell of a lot more juice in that lemon, right? But would it have been enough to get people to come back from WCW? Because that's what you're dealing with at that point in time. You're dealing with people who have gone over to the NWO and of seeing wrestling like they'd never seen it before. And look, people can debate till the cows come home about, how much did Eric or, really innovate or, didn't innovate. Everyone seems to have a different, but I'm sorry, you cannot look at the WCW product in 1996 and compare it to the WWF product and not tell me that was the beginning of the Attitude Era.
Yep.
Like that ushered in like the mentality.
Absolutely.
So I think that when they'd gone so far down that rabbit hole, I don't know if a bad guy wrestler versus good guy wrestler was going to ever be the angle to get people back. I think that in a weird way, even though it wasn't planned, they had to have that Mr. McMahon thing because it was based off something that was real.
Well, here's the psychology of it. No one has ever looked and said, hey, I want to punch a Canadian. But everyone has said, hey, I'd really like to punch my boss because he's an asshole.
Well, and also just the other part of it is the fact that we were getting to that point where most of us had been watching wrestling as kids and now we're watching it as young adults and we're going like, we know this isn't real, but we're watching anyway.
Oh, yeah.
So then when something suddenly happened where it's like, oh, that's not supposed to happen. They like, I remember going to high school and people like, no, they like really hate each other. Like in real life, it was always, there was always that thing of like, this is in real life. That was happening in real life. That's what
same with the NWO.
Amazing swirl of like popularity was that
that's the NWO.
Like,
we all know it's fake.
I heard that one guy did it for real, and it was that's where it all came from.
WWF's really there. They're taking over WCW. That was the first thing, Hall and Nash. WWF's taking over WCW.
Well, and obviously with the whole thing with Brett, it was such an urban legend for like kids in school because we weren't all living on the internet. Like
there was no internet.
We were there was, but we weren't. But it was like comic book guy from The Simpsons was sort of on there at that point, and that was about it, right? Well, it wasn't like everyone wasn't privy to it. It was more like you'd have hearsay, like like my friend's older brother said that like he read that it's and so it was always like Chinese whispers. It'd be like, oh, it's the different Ultimate Warrior. He's got, the other guy died and he came back. Just, it was all sorts of weird wrestling urban legends all the time, right? And that's what helped, I think, peak the
That's
swell.
why you can't get highlights in your hair.
Like, Vince McMahon, like, he really owns the WWF, and like he, so he's like the real owner. So everyone went, oh wait, he's the real owner. I mean, even like, I remember like some of my friends' parents at school telling me this stuff as if like I did, as if like they were really in the know. They're like, he really is the owner, and I'm like, yeah, I know. Like it took on a life of its own, and I don't know if you'd ever got that with a good guy wrestler against a bad guy wrestler, not at that point in time.
I don't know if you'll ever have anything work out as perfect as you did with the WWF in 1997 with the USA versus Canada, where if you're an American wrestler, you are now a heel anywhere else in the world, especially in Canada. And if you're a Canadian wrestler, you're a heel in the US. But not only that, but that whole summer, they were running shows all throughout the United States and Canada. So Raw 1 week would be in Pittsburgh, the next week it's in Toronto, the next week it's in Detroit, then it's in Calgary, and it just worked out absolutely perfect. And you couldn't have scripted it any better.
There was definitely a golden opportunity there to change the way that you book wrestling to almost make it like team sports. Like you could have really. That could have provided a dynamic that no one had ever got their hands on before, where this one guy was so popular in anywhere except the US, and then was hated in the US. Like it as a character depth, like there was really nothing that could touch Bret in 97 as far as like a compelling character that felt so real, because it was, I've talked to Bret about that, and that's the thing he said, it was so special because it was all so real. Like we were just really trying to sort of feel every single week, like, what people were really feeling, and just kind of treating it like, he goes, I just would treat it like it was a shoot. That's basically Bret's work in a nutshell. Yeah. And that's why he was so good. That's why I admire him so much.
Well, Nick, I hate to do this, but we're out of time tonight.
Got to leave them wanting more, right?
I think we're going to have to schedule a Legends Let's Rethink This Part 2 with Nick Aldis.
I think I can make that work.
And come back and do some more, because I think we all went in depth a little bit more than what we were originally planning.
Yes.
I have a tendency to get into the weeds.
Well,
I think we call ourselves blowhards.
If you had known,
I don't want you to blow me harder, or
you wouldn't imagine how many text messages that I have gotten throughout this show talking about how great you are. And people are loving this. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and end it right here. We're ready for WrestleMania 5. We'll come back at another time. We'll promote it all out, and we'll come back and we'll start at WrestleMania 5, and we'll work our way up to that next. I mean, we're talking 3-4 year run here, and then we're good to go. But I don't see how you're going to be able to top the conversation that we had tonight, because this has been awesome.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. I appreciate it.
Us here with Filter Free Popcast and the Filter Free Network, we can't thank you enough for the time you spent with us. And
before we get out of here, I can't help but keep looking at your name on the screen. Is there something you would like to plug, maybe with a code Impact somewhere?
Well, I appreciate you bringing that up, Timmy. Yeah, no, like many of you know, my other passion besides wrestling is my supplement company, Legacy Sports Nutrition. We're experienced. We've have thousands of satisfied customers across the US, across North America, across the world. And our best-selling Test Booster, Test X9, and our best-selling Sleep Aid Recovery PM are both products that I use every day, and hear so much great feedback. Actually, when I was in Texas last week, one of the guys on that show came up to me and said, "Oh, I've been looking forward to meeting you for so long. I've been using Legacy Subs for like 3 months and I've lost 30 pounds." I'm going like, "Wait, what? Holy shit, that's awesome." I've been meeting people at WrestleCon. I shared one of their stories again. A guy called Jay who's been using the products for about a year and is down like 50 pounds and 10 inches on his waist. So just really pleased with the progress of it. And to celebrate my return to Impact, we've activated code IMPACT at legacysubs.com for 20% off your entire order. These are products that I use myself. The women's line are products that Mickey uses herself. She curated them, designed them. I curated and designed all the other products. We are very passionate about this. And if you're looking to level up your health and well-being and performance, give us a shot at legacysubs.com.
Yes, and that's Legacy Subs, and that's SUPPS.
LegacySUPPS.com. Use code IMPACT for 20% off. Gents, it's been a pleasure. I'm going to go and eat some dinner and then get a very, very early night because I am not as rock and roll as I once was.
Go to bed, Mr. On Fumes.
I will. All right. Thanks,
Nick. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Nick.
I didn't get to tell him that I thought Gorilla Monsoon owned the WWF until like 1998.
No, he was president.
I know, but
El Presidente.
Take us off live.